Thursday night at Vestry Row, my stepmother, Marla, leaned over her wine. "Quit," she whispered, "or I'll make you unemployable." Then she slapped me, the sound cracking through the candlelit room, hard enough to rattle my fork. She had no idea who the man in the leather chair directly behind her, seat 17, was, but I did, and the recorder in my shirt button knew it had just captured the spark that would ignite everything. My name is Ava Calder. Tonight, that name felt less like an identity and more like a target. The air in Vestry Row was thick with the calculated performance of wealth. It smelled of brown butter basted over scallops, of hazelnuts toasting for a dessert I would never taste. Amber light, the color of old whiskey, dripped from brass fixtures, catching the edges of heavy silver cutlery and the nervous sweat on a waiter's brow. A piano played somewhere in the distance, its melody a delicate, melancholic thread weaving through the civilized symphony of clinking glasses and muted conversations. It was the kind of place where terrible things were discussed in beautiful surroundings, the gilded cage of Grayford's elite. I, at 32 years old, the director of operations for Northbridge Dynamics, was a part of that elite, a gilded bird about to have her wings clipped. Across the small, starched white table sat Marla Greer Calder, my stepmother and the chief compliance officer of the same company. 20 years she'd been in my life, a fixture of cool efficiency who had married my father, Graham Calder. When I was 12, tonight, she wore a charcoal suit with lines so sharp they could have been drawn by a laser. The amber light was kind to most, but on Marla, it simply exposed the cold, polished marble of her ambition. She held her wineglass by the stem, her fingers long and predatory, the ruby liquid inside matching the shade of her lipstick. She placed her linen napkin on the table with a quiet finality, as if a general were planting a flag on conquered territory. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, locked onto mine. "Let's be clear. Ava," she began, her voice a low, smooth purr that didn't carry past our table. "This is a family talk. That means no recorders, no lawyers, and no corporate posturing." The irony was so thick I could taste it, more bitter than the espresso at the next table. A family talk with Marla was about as familial as a shark negotiating with a seal. My right hand rested in my lap, my thumb finding the second button on my silk blouse. It felt no different from the others, a simple mother-of-pearl disc, but a gentle press produced a response no one could see. Beneath my finger, a microscopic LED blinked a single, reassuring green before going dark. The device was active, silent, waiting. "I'm not posturing. Marla," I said, my voice steady. I had rehearsed this moment, this tone, for weeks, calm, measured, giving nothing away. She smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of her lips. It never reached her eyes. "Good." She slid a crisp, white envelope across the table. It landed next to my water glass with a soft, definitive thud. It wasn't a business envelope. It was heavy cardstock, the kind used for ultimatums. "Your severance agreement, generous, under the circumstances." My heart began a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs, a rhythm of war. "What circumstances?" "The ones I'll be forced to create if you don't sign it, right now," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the envelope's corner. "Imagine, Ava, a few quiet conversations with HR about your aggressive management style, a carefully placed tip to the IRS about that creative accounting on your personal taxes 3 years ago, you know, the one your father helped you with, and of course, a few words whispered to the right people in the media about your indiscretions. By the time I'm done, the only operations you'll be directing are at the local soup kitchen." The threats were surgical, precise. She knew where to cut. She had spent years observing my life, not as a stepmother, but as a strategist studying an opponent. My mind flashed through the fabricated scenarios, the half-truths twisted into career-ending scandals. This was her domain. Compliance, the weaponization of rules. I kept my hands folded on the table, a portrait of composure I did not feel. I had anticipated the blackmail, but the sheer, unvarnished venom of it still landed like a punch to the gut. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to hold her predatory smile. Finally, I asked the one question that mattered, my voice barely a whisper. Why? Her smile widened, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine, ugly triumph lit her eyes. The mask slipped. Because your seat is mine, darling. Your father built an empire, and I have no intention of letting his sentimental little girl play with the keys to the kingdom. Director of Operations is a stepping stone to the C-suite, a stone I intend to step on. There it was, the raw reptilian ambition that had been slithering just beneath the surface for 2 decades. It wasn't about my competence or my performance. It was about power, my existence in a role I had earned. Metric by metric, KPI by painful KPI, was an obstacle in her path. I looked at the envelope, then back at her. The piano music seemed to fade. The clinking of silverware receded. The entire buzzing restaurant narrowed to the space between us, a battlefield 2 feet wide. I had spent 6 months gathering evidence of her corruption. The ghost contractors, the laundered money through the North Slip Port project. This dinner, this confrontation, was the final piece I needed. A direct threat, an act of coercion. It was a trap, and she had just walked straight into it. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between us with the force of a slammed door. For a second, Marla's face registered pure shock. She was not a woman who was told no. Her expression hardened, the manufactured grace dissolving into raw fury. Her hand moved in a blur. It wasn't a clumsy, angry swing. It was a precise, controlled strike, the kind she used to silence dissent in board meetings. Only this time it was physical. The sound was shockingly loud in the refined atmosphere, a sharp, ugly crack, like a champagne cork popping at a funeral. It seemed to suck the air out of the room. My head snapped to the side, and a hot, blooming sting erupted on my left cheek. My eyes watered instantly. The tines of my fork rattled against the porcelain plate, a tiny, metallic shiver in the sudden, profound silence. The low hum of conversation around us faltered and died. I could feel dozens of eyes on us. In the periphery, I saw a couple at the adjacent table freeze, their wine glasses paused halfway to their lips. Directly behind Marla's chair, at the table designated number 17, a man with a shock of distinguished silver hair had been dining alone. He hadn't turned at the sound, hadn't flinched, but I saw his hand, which had been lifting a piece of steak to his mouth, stop and deliberately place the fork back down on his plate. He didn't look. He didn't have to. He was listening. A floor manager, a young man with panicked eyes and an ill-fitting tuxedo, scurried toward our table. "Is everything all right here, Ms. Greer-Calder?" he stammered, his gaze darting from Marla's thunderous face to the bright red mark blossoming on my cheek. Marla didn't even look at him. Her eyes were still locked on me, blazing with a cold fire. "Everything is fine," she said, her voice dripping ice. "My daughter is clumsy, she just tripped." The lie was audacious, breathtaking in its arrogance. She was daring me to contradict her, to make a scene, but I didn't need to. The most important work was already done. Slowly, deliberately. I picked up my water glass. My hand was shaking, but I steadied it. I took a small sip, the cool liquid a balm against the sudden dryness in my throat. My cheek throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pain. As I lowered the glass, I let my gaze drift past Marla's shoulder, focusing on the man in seat 17. He remained perfectly still, his back to us, a silhouette of quiet authority. But in the dim light, I saw the subtle glow of a phone screen illuminate his lap. I watched as his thumb moved silently across the glass. A moment later, I felt it, a soft, single vibration from the phone tucked away in my purse. I didn't need to look at the screen. I knew the sender. I knew the message. It was one word, a confirmation that the recording, the entire conversation, the threat, the coercion, the confession of motive, the sound of the assault, had been received. Delivered. Northbridge Dynamics is the kind of company that prints its mission statement on recycled paper with soy-based ink on the polished granite wall of every lobby, from Grayford Tower to our shipping hubs in Baltimore. The same 3 words are carved in a serene, confident font. Integrity moves us. It's a brilliant piece of marketing. We were, according to the latest ESG reports, and a fawning feature in the Wall Street Journal. The cleanest logistics company on the eastern seaboard. We moved billions of dollars in goods across the globe with a carbon footprint so small it was practically a tiptoe, and a corporate ethics record so pristine it squeaked. Our trucks were electric, our warehouses were solar-powered, and our soul, supposedly, was pure. The high priestess of this corporate religion was Marla Greer Calder. As Chief Compliance Officer, she was celebrated in trade publications as our ethical gatekeeper, the architect of our transparency. She managed the internal audit division, oversaw regulatory adherence, and most importantly, held the keys to the anonymous whistleblowing hotline. If a Northbridge employee saw something wrong, they were encouraged to call a number that led directly to an answering service managed by Marla's department. She was the company's conscience, its confessor, and its judge. I had lived in her shadow since I was 12 years old, a quiet, gangly girl, dwarfed by the sheer force of her personality. My father, Graham Calder, the brilliant and often emotionally oblivious founder of Northbridge, had been captivated by her sharp intellect and polished ambition. He saw a partner. I saw an occupation. Marla didn't move into our house. She annexed it. She managed our lives with the same cool efficiency she applied to a corporate takeover, optimizing family dinners and scheduling emotional check-ins like quarterly reviews. At the Grayford Tower headquarters, the unofficial moniker for her was Iron Lace. The lace was for public consumption. The delicate, intricate persona she presented at charity galas and in mentorship meetings. She was a champion of women in business, always ready with a supportive quote or a LinkedIn recommendation. The iron was what you encountered in the boardroom. It was the unyielding core, the razor-sharp mind that could dissect a rival's proposal and expose its fatal flaw in under a minute. It was the part of her that leveraged minor policy infractions into career-ending scandals, all under the unimpeachable banner of maintaining compliance. The delicate balance of power at Northbridge shattered a year ago when my father had a massive stroke. He survived, but the vibrant, commanding man who built this company from a single truck into a global powerhouse was gone, replaced by a frail man who struggled for words. His absence created a vacuum, and the battle to fill it began immediately. The corporate chessboard was reset, and the most powerful piece was not the CEO or the CFO, it was the Chief Compliance Officer. In the modern American corporation, control over the rules is the ultimate power. It's the legal, board-approved lever you can use to methodically and ruthlessly crush your opponents. Marla finally had her hand on that lever. I was her primary obstacle. I hadn't inherited my position. I had fought for it. My career at Northbridge started in the data pits. As a junior logistics analyst, I rose to director of operations not because my last name was Calder, but because I could make the numbers bend to my will. I streamlined our supply chain, shaving 12% off our fuel costs. I implemented a predictive analytics model that cut our spoilage rate in the cold chain division by a third. Every key performance indicator I achieved was a callus on my hands, a testament to late nights spent staring at spreadsheets and early mornings on warehouse floors. I understood the nuts and bolts of the company, the actual movement of goods. In a way, Marla, with her theoretical understanding of rules and regulations, never could. My operational success was a direct threat to her claim to the throne. The whispers started 6 months after my father's stroke. Faint at first, then more persistent. Rumors about the North Slip Port expansion project, a massive undertaking that was bleeding money. The word was that Marla had set up a network of ghost contractors, consulting and security firms that existed only on paper. They submitted exorbitant invoices for services never rendered, and Marla, as the head of compliance, personally signed off on them, citing sensitive security protocols that prevented wider oversight. Then things got darker. An accountant in payables, a quiet man named Ben, noticed an irregularity and did his duty. He used the anonymous hotline. A week later, the digital file of his report was corrupted and vanished from the server. A month after that, Ben's position was eliminated in a departmental restructuring. He left with a generous severance package and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. He was a ghost now. 2. Another employee in IT who asked too many questions about server access logs was suddenly headhunted for a dream job in Dubai. People who got too close to North Slip didn't just get fired. They disappeared from the corporate world. I knew I couldn't use the official channels. They all led to her. So I started my own investigation, a clandestine operation conducted after hours, using encrypted drives and burner phones. For 6 agonizing months, I gathered the pieces. I found invoices from 3 different security firms that all shared the same bank routing number and were registered to a PIO box in Delaware. By digging into the file metadata, I discovered they were all created from the same Microsoft Word template on the same computer, a machine registered to Marla's executive assistant. I found emails, timed to send automatically at 3 a.m. on Sundays, where Marla approved massive wire transfers, creating a digital paper trail of a diligent executive working around the clock. The real breakthrough came from the cold storage warehouse security footage. The ghost contractors were supposedly providing on-site security, but their trucks were showing up at the loading docks. The manifests listed their cargo as empty pallets being returned, but I saw something the falsified logs couldn't hide. I saw the strain on the truck's hydraulic lifts, the way the tires compressed under a significant weight, using a thermal imaging filter on the footage. I saw the empty pallets radiating a faint, cold signature. They weren't empty. They were loaded with something valuable enough to be kept refrigerated and moved off the books. Untaxed pharmaceuticals, high-end electronics. I didn't know for sure, but I knew Marla was using Northbridge's clean supply chain as her personal black market shipping service. I had the data, the logs, the invoices, the footage, but it was all circumstantial. A web of digital ghosts that a skilled lawyer could dismiss as clerical errors or a conspiracy by a disgruntled stepdaughter. I knew Marla would come for me eventually, and I couldn't fight her on her turf. In the sterile conference rooms of Grayford Tower, I needed something more, something undeniable. So I laid a trap. I let a carefully crafted rumor slip that I was close to uncovering the North Slip fraud. I knew her ego and her aggression wouldn't allow her to ignore the threat. She would need to remove me, and she would want to do it personally. The invitation to dinner at Vestry Row was the result. It wasn't a negotiation, it was an execution, and that's exactly what I was counting on. The evening at Vestry Row wasn't a disaster, it was a gambit. I needed to push her past the point of plausible deniability. I needed her to threaten me, to try and blackmail me, to lay out her entire illegal premise on the table. The violence was an unexpected bonus, a brutal, ugly exclamation point on the evidence, the slap, the coercion, the demand I resign, the admission that she wanted my chair. It was a prosecutor's dream, and it was all on tape, a pristine audio file now safely in the hands of the one man who could burn her perfect, ethical world to the ground. The man in seat 17 did not introduce himself. He didn't need to. Power of his kind doesn't announce its arrival. It simply changes the gravity of a room. As the flustered manager retreated, mumbling apologies Marla didn't bother to acknowledge, I studied the man's reflection in the dark glass of the wine chiller behind him. He had silver hair, cut short and neat, and wore a simple dark suit. No tie. There was no expensive watch on his wrist, just a plain, heavy platinum ring on his right hand. It didn't catch the light. It seemed to absorb it. It was the ring of a man who had signed documents that ended careers and moved markets. A man for whom flash was a liability. His eyes, even in the distorted reflection, were still and unnervingly perceptive. They were the eyes of a man who missed nothing. His name was Elliot Vance. I knew this not from a formal introduction, but from a series of encrypted emails exchanged through a secure, anonymous portal over the last 3 months. The board of directors, growing wary of Marla's unchecked power and the bleeding wound of the North Slip project, had hired him. His official, deeply buried title was Independent Investigator for the Board. He was a ghost, a whisper in the corporate machine, tasked with finding the rot my father was no longer capable of seeing. He was my secret ally, the audience for the performance Marla had just so spectacularly delivered. But that was only the first layer, the one the board itself knew. I had done my own digging on Mr. Vance. It took me a week of cross-referencing SEC filings and shareholder declarations through a financial data service I paid for out of my own pocket. Elliot Vance was more than a hired investigator. He was the designated proxy voter for Acheron Capital, a notoriously aggressive but quiet private equity fund that had, over the last 2 years, become Northbridge Dynamics' second-largest shareholder. They owned a 19% stake in the company. Vance wasn't just here to write a report. He was here to protect an investment. He wasn't a fact-finder. He was a kingmaker, or a queen-breaker. He held the votes to shift the balance of power in an instant. The beautiful, terrible irony was how he ended up sitting directly behind my executioner. Northbridge, in a bid to showcase our logistical prowess, had developed a proprietary corporate reservation and travel management software. We provided it, free of charge, to high-end establishments frequented by our top executives, including Vestry Row. The algorithm was designed to optimize seating for privacy and discretion. Analyzing sightlines and acoustics, Marla, a creature of habit and control, always requested table 9, her preferred spot. The algorithm, processing Vance's own request for a quiet, single table, had analyzed the room's layout and placed him in seat 17. It was the perfect auditory vantage point with zero direct line of sight from table 9. It was a technological blind spot. Marla had been outmaneuvered by the very efficiency she championed, undone by a piece of code written by her own company. She had no idea that the system had placed her judge and jury 3 feet behind her. Vance's resume, what little I could find of it publicly, was as understated and formidable as his appearance. Before his lucrative career in corporate governance, he had spent a decade as a senior arbiter for the National Labor Relations Board. He specialized in complex workplace disputes, hostile environment claims, executive malfeasance, and most notably, cases involving workplace assault and intimidation. This wasn't just a financial matter for him anymore. Marla, in her hubris, had taken a situation about corporate fraud and escalated it into his specific field of expertise. She had handed a master prosecutor his star exhibit. The single, silent vibration of my phone in my purse was still a phantom presence against my leg. It was our prearranged signal, the message. Delivered meant the audio file was secure, but it meant something more. It was the starting gun. An emergency session of the board of directors would be convened within 48 hours. My digital evidence was compelling, but Vance needed something more. His encrypted instructions had been clear. I need incontrovertible, living proof, something they cannot dismiss as a digital fabrication or a personal vendetta. The slap was that proof. I was that proof. Marla flagged down the waiter, her composure returning like a mask being lowered back into place. "Another glass of the Sancerre," she ordered, her voice crisp. She looked back at me, a smirk playing on her lips. She thought she had broken me. She believed the slap was the final word, the physical punctuation to her threat. She saw my silence as submission. I made a small, calculated movement. I picked up my water glass again, and as I took a sip, I turned my head slightly to the left, angling my face toward the reflective wine chiller. The gesture was natural, a simple shift of posture, but it gave the man in seat 17 a clear, reflected view of the angry red handprint blooming on my cheek. It was a forensic detail. It was for the photographs I would take in an hour, time-stamped and medically documented. It was for the record. "It's a shame, really," Marla mused, swirling the new pour of wine. She looked at me with a gaze that was almost pitying. the way a scientist might pity a lab rat in a maze. You had potential, but you have your father's sentimentality. She took a delicate sip. You should know, she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If you tell anyone about this, about any of it, no one will believe you. You're the emotional daughter. Lashing out. I am the guardian of this company's integrity. Whose story do you think the board will prefer? Her arrogance was a shield, but I could see the cracks in it. This was her final, desperate attempt to control the narrative. In my mind's eye, I could see Elliot Vance in his chair, his face impassive. I could practically hear the clinical, dispassionate process of his thoughts. He wouldn't be thinking about the drama or the family dynamics. He would be translating the scene into the cold, hard language of evidence. I imagined him making a mental note, or perhaps a discreet one on a secure device in his lap. Item 1. Direct witness observation of physical assault by a superior officer on a subordinate. Item 2. Explicit professional threat and blackmail. I'll make you unemployable. Item 3. Admission of motive. Your seat is mine. Item 4. Attempt to discredit a potential witness. The assault wasn't just an act of violence, it was a corroborating piece of evidence for the entire fraudulent scheme. It demonstrated her methods. I lowered my water glass and met her gaze. The stinging in my cheek had subsided to a low, steady throb, a physical reminder of the stakes. I let a small, thin smile touch my lips. It was the first genuine expression I had allowed myself all evening. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile that promised a reckoning. We'll see, I said softly, my voice perfectly even. We'll see who believes whom. The taxi ride back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights bleeding through rain-streaked glass. The city's pulse was a dull, distant throb, secondary to the frantic, focused rhythm of my own actions. I didn't wait until I got home, the moment the cab's doors closed, sealing me in a cocoon of worn leather and stale air freshener. I was already at work. My purse was a mobile command center. I pulled out the small, powerful device, the second button from my blouse, and connected it to a dongle on my phone. The audio file was 27 minutes long, a pristine recording of the entire encounter. I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to. The sting on my cheek was a better transcript than any audio playback. With a few taps, I initiated the upload sequence. The file, encrypted and packaged, was sent not to one location, but to 4. The primary was a secure, blockchain-verified digital evidence locker, a service used by law firms, which gave the file a non-reputable, cryptographically signed timestamp. The file was now legally documented as existing at this exact moment. 3 redundant copies were simultaneously pushed to encrypted folders on an Amazon Web Services server, a Microsoft Azure cloud, and a private server I maintained in a secure data center in Iceland. Overkill, perhaps, but Marla had taught me that in a war of information, redundancy is survival. I paid the driver in cash and slipped out into the rain-slicked night, my head down. My next stop was not my quiet, empty apartment, but the fluorescent, antiseptic glare of a 24-hour urgent care clinic 3 blocks away. The doctor on duty was young, tired, and utterly unimpressed by my story of walking into a door. He didn't care. He was there to document, in the examination room, under a light that showed no mercy. I took the photos myself. My phone's camera was high resolution, but I didn't just snap a selfie. I held a small plastic card next to my face, a medically standard color calibration ruler. It provided a baseline for reds, blues, and yellows, making the images legally verifiable and immune to accusations of digital alteration. The camera captured every detail of the broken capillaries, the precise outline of her fingers on my skin. The doctor did his part, his pen scratching on a form. His assessment was brief, clinical, and perfect. Patient presents with a significant contusion and erythema on the left cheek, consistent with a forceful, open-hand strike, no other signs of trauma. I had the receipt and a signed copy of his report before I left. Exhibit B. back in my apartment, the city lights of Grayford painting patterns on my wet windows. I sat at my desk. The only light inside was the glow of my monitors. I didn't turn on a lamp. I felt safer in the dark. I opened a hardened browser, routed through the Tor network, and logged into a disposable, encrypted email account. The message was already drafted. It was addressed to the anonymous email address Elliot Vance had provided. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a single, attached file. A zip archive containing the metadata analysis of the North Slip contractor invoices. It showed, irrefutably, that 3 separate multi-million-dollar invoices from 3 different companies had been created on the same device, registered to Marla's executive assistant, within the same 4-hour window. I hit send. The first digital shot was fired. Next, I logged into the Northbridge corporate network through my secure VPN, a backdoor I had built for myself that bypassed the standard monitoring protocols. I went straight to the security and access control system, specifically the logs for the North Slip warehouse. I pulled the records for the past 6 months, filtering for after-hours access. There they were, dozens of late-night entries, all logged to temporary contractor badges. I cross-referenced the badge numbers with the Human Resources Issuance Database. My breath caught in my throat. The temporary badges hadn't been issued by building security or logistics. They were issued and authorized directly by the Office of Compliance, by Marla's own department. She wasn't just approving the payments, she was handing them the keys. My fingers flew across the keyboard, chasing another thread, the fleet management system. Every Northbridge truck is tracked by GPS, its engine performance and fuel consumption monitored in real time. I pulled the logs for the specific trucks used by the ghost contractors on the nights in question. As I'd seen before, the cargo sensor logs all read 0, indicating an empty trailer, but then I pulled the corresponding fuel consumption data. The numbers told a different story. The fuel burn rate was consistent with a truck carrying a load of at least 15 to 20 tons. A ghost was sitting on the scales. And then I found the mistake, the sloppy, arrogant error that would be her undoing. The GPS logs had been tampered with. Certain segments of the truck's routes, specifically the portions that deviated toward an unregistered container yard near the port, had been scrubbed, but Marla's IT cronies had only altered the primary log files. They hadn't thought to check the rolling 30-day raw data backups on the secondary server. I accessed it, and there it was, the original, unaltered data, a complete, unedited record of every unauthorized detour, every secret stop. I spent the next hour working in Tableau, the data visualization software I use to make sense of our complex logistics network. But tonight, I wasn't tracking shipping containers. I was mapping a crime. I fed all the data in. The invoice creation times, the badge swipes at the warehouse, the unaltered GPS coordinates, the fuel logs. I created a timeline, an interactive, 18-minute presentation that linked every piece of digital evidence. On the screen, it looked like a constellation of deceit. Each data point was a bright, damning star. Each line I drew between them was another bar on Marla's cage. It was a visualization of the truth, the story the system told before she tortured it into a lie. Just as I was saving the final version, a notification popped up on my screen. An email from my personal lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense labor attorney I had retained 2 months ago. The subject line was simple. For tomorrow. Attached was a draft of a formal evidence preservation and litigation hold notice, addressed to the Northbridge Board of Directors. It was a legal demand, a warning shot across the bow, commanding them not to delete, alter, or destroy any of the electronic records I had just finished analyzing. My work was done. The trap was set. The evidence was gathered and secured. The legal machinery was ready to grind. I picked up my burner phone, the one used only for communication with Vance. My message was 5 words. I am ready to testify. I hit send and watched the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The reply came back in less than a minute. It was curt, precise, and absolute. Go dark for 36 hours. Do not touch the system again. It was an order to wait. to let the pieces he was moving fall into place. The hardest part was about to begin. The silence, the stillness. I powered down my monitors, plunging the room into darkness. On my coffee table, a single candle I had lit earlier flickered, its small flame dancing in the gloom. I walked over and blew it out. The wisp of smoke curled into the air and disappeared. The night stood still, like a taut string waiting to be plucked. The email arrived at 8:05 a.m. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Mandatory internal hearing, 9 o'clock a.m., conference room 34B. The sender was Marla's executive assistant. The subject of the hearing was me. It was a classic Marla move, a preemptive strike, designed to frame the narrative before I could even speak. She was bringing me into her arena, the sterile, glass-walled domain of the compliance department, where she was queen, judge, and executioner all in one. It was meant to be an ambush. She just didn't realize I'd been hunting her for 6 months. I walked into 34B at precisely 8:59 a.m. The room was cold, the air conditioning humming a low, monotonous drone. Marla sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, flanked by her 2 most loyal lieutenants from compliance and a stone-faced lawyer from our in-house counsel. They were her Praetorian Guard. Across from them sat Jace, a senior analyst from IT, looking pale and uncomfortable. He was there to be her technical witness, to attest to whatever digital reality she had fabricated. He avoided my gaze. Marla smiled as I entered, a brilliant, predatory display of white teeth. It was the same smile she gave to the cameras at the ESG awards ceremony. "Ava, thank you for joining us. Please, have a seat." Her voice was a smooth, reasonable balm intended to soothe and disarm. "We're here today because of some concerns. It seems you had something of an emotional episode last night at Vestry Row, a public outburst. We're here to discuss your fitness to continue in your role, for your own well-being." Of course. She had laid her trap. It was my word against hers, the powerful, stable chief compliance officer against the emotional stepdaughter. In the rigidly polite world of corporate America, a public display of emotion was a death sentence. I didn't sit down. I walked to the table and stood directly opposite her. The throbbing in my cheek had faded to a dull, purple-yellow bruise, which I had deliberately left uncovered by makeup. I let them all see it. I placed a single manila envelope on the gleaming surface of the table. The sound it made was quiet, but it seemed to echo in the tense silence. "This wasn't an emotional episode," I said, my voice low and steady. "It was an assault." Marla's smile tightened at the edges. "Ava, we have witnesses who said you were unsteady, that you tripped." "I have a witness too," I replied, sliding the contents out of the envelope. I didn't scatter them. I placed them in a neat, precise row. First, the doctor's report from the urgent care clinic, his clinical description of an open-hand strike sitting starkly on the page. Next, the series of high-resolution photographs, the medical color ruler in each shot, making the truth of the injury undeniable. And last, a small, black USB flash drive, which I placed dead center on the table. "This," I said, tapping the drive with my index finger, "is a recording of our entire conversation, the threats, the blackmail, and the sound of you striking me." The in-house counsel shifted in his seat, his professional neutrality evaporating. Marla's lieutenant stared at the USB drive as if it were a scorpion. Marla, however, held my gaze, her eyes turning to chips of ice. It was then that I looked at Jace from IT. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. He was a good man, trapped in a bad system, a digital janitor forced to clean up Marla's messes. He knew about the altered server logs, the scrubbed GPS data. He had seen the ghosts in the machine. In that fleeting moment of eye contact, he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was tiny, a barely there dip of his chin, but it was enough. It was a confirmation. He knew. Marla let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like tearing silk. "A recording? Photographs? How pathetically theatrical. You've been busy, but it's meaningless. Digital files can be faked. A doctor's note can be bought. This is a desperate, transparent attempt to deflect from your own instability. She waved a dismissive hand at the evidence. This is all inadmissible fabrication. Fabrication was the word she was counting on, the word that would muddy the waters and turn this into a he said, she said stalemate she knew she could win. And that's when the door to the conference room opened. It didn't swing open. It was pushed with a quiet, deliberate weight. Elliot Vance stepped inside. He wore the same dark suit as the night before. Clipped to his lapel was a generic Northbridge visitor's badge that simply read, Consultant. The title was an absurdity. No one in the room, least of all Marla, believed he was a mere consultant. The way he moved, the way he surveyed the room, radiated an authority that didn't come from a plastic badge. Every eye swiveled to him. The corporate lawyer looked like he'd seen a ghost. Marla's face, for the first time, registered a flicker of genuine uncertainty. Vance closed the door behind him, the soft click of the latch sounding like a gavel. He walked calmly to the table, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces before finally landing on Marla. His expression was utterly neutral, impossible to read. Ms. Greer-Calder, he said, his voice calm and even, devoid of any inflection. It was the voice of a man stating a fact, not making an accusation. You and I haven't been formally introduced. My name is Elliot Vance. He paused for a beat, letting his name hang in the air. Then he delivered the blow. I was sitting in the chair behind you last night at Vestry Row. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if the room's oxygen supply had been cut off. No one breathed. No one moved. The steady, quiet hum of the air conditioning suddenly seemed deafening. The ticking of the large, minimalist clock on the wall sounded like a hammer striking crystal. Marla's carefully constructed reality, her narrative of my emotional episode, had just been vaporized by a single, simple sentence. She had a witness, not just any witness, but a man whose very presence in this room signified that the game had escalated far beyond her control. Vance's eyes moved from Marla to me, then to the evidence I had laid out on the table. He gave a slight nod, not of encouragement, but of acknowledgement. The pieces were in place. He then addressed the room, though his words were clearly aimed at Marla. As of this moment, 9:07 a.m., by the authority vested in me by the Board of Directors of Northbridge Dynamics, this informal hearing is concluded. He spoke with the quiet finality of a judge delivering a verdict. A formal, board-supervised investigation into the North Slip project, as well as into the events of last night, is now underway. All relevant personnel are instructed to cooperate fully. He turned his gaze to Jace. Mr. Davies, he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. You will place a litigation hold on all company servers, effective immediately. All access logs, emails, financial records, and security data are to be preserved in their current state. Any attempt to alter, delete, or otherwise destroy digital evidence will be considered a federal offense. Do you understand? Jays, looking immensely relieved, simply said, Yes, sir. Elliot Vance's gaze returned to Marla. She was staring at him, her mouth slightly agape. The iron-lace persona was gone, stripped away to reveal something raw and panicked underneath. The mask hadn't just slipped, it had shattered. Her mind, always 3 steps ahead, always armed with a countermove, a pre-written script, was blank. For the first time since I had known her, Marla Greer-Calder had absolutely no idea what to say next. She was silent. The emergency board meeting was convened on the 38th floor, in the main conference room nicknamed the Glass Box. It was an apt name. 3 of the 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic, godlike view of Grayford. Today, the city was weeping. A steady gray rain fell, streaking down the glass like digital static, blurring the world outside into an impressionist smear of headlights and concrete. The 4th wall was a massive, interactive smart screen, currently dark. The only light in the room came from recessed fluorescent strips in the ceiling, casting a cold, blue-white glare on the 7 faces arrayed around the vast, sterile table. It wasn't a room for discussion, it was a room for dissection. Marla was already there when I was escorted in, seated at the far end of the table with her lawyer. She looked composed, dressed in a severe navy blue suit, a soldier ready for a battle she still believed she could win. Her confidence was an armor polished by years of corporate warfare, but I could see the tension in the set of her jaw, the way her fingers were clamped together on the table in front of her. I took my seat opposite her, with Elliot Vance and my own attorney beside me. At the head of the table sat Ronan Blake, the interim chairman of the board. Ronan was a retired federal judge, a man with a spine made of steel and a face carved from granite. He ran board meetings like a courtroom, and today was no exception. "Let's begin," Ronan said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the tension. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Vance has invoked Article 7 of the corporate bylaws, compelling this emergency session. We are here to review evidence pertaining to allegations of gross misconduct against a senior officer of this company, Ms. Marla Greer-Calder." He looked down the table at Marla. "Ms. Greer-Calder, you are here to observe. Your counsel may advise you, but you will not speak unless spoken to. Is that understood?" Marla gave a stiff, formal nod. "Good," Ronan said. He turned his gaze to me. "Ms. Calder, you and Mr. Vance have presented the board with a summary of evidence. I want to see it, all of it, on the screen." And so began the clinical, brutal dismantling of Marla's empire. One by one, the digital ghosts I had chased through the server logs were resurrected on the 20-foot screen. First, the falsified invoices from the North Slip ghost contractors, displayed next to the metadata proving they were all created on the same machine. Then, the warehouse access logs, showing the contractor badges issued by Marla's own department, time-stamped at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Then came the GPS data, a split screen showing the official, doctored route of a cargo truck next to the raw, unaltered data from the backup server, the secret detour to the container yard traced in a bright, damning red line. Finally, Ronan looked at me. The final piece of evidence from last night, Ms. Calder. I nodded to my lawyer, who clicked a file. My own face filled the screen. The image was massive, shot under the merciless fluorescent lights of the clinic. The handprint on my cheek was a galaxy of violent color. Reds, purples, yellows, stark against my pale skin. The medical ruler next to my face gave it a cold, objective scale, turning an act of intimate violence into a piece of forensic data. A collective, sharp intake of breath went through the room. Two of the board members, women Marla had mentored, visibly flinched. "Mr. Vance," Ronan said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you have submitted a statement attesting that you witnessed the act that caused this injury." "I did," Vance confirmed, his tone flat and factual. "I was present, I heard the threat, and I heard and saw the subsequent physical strike. We also," Ronan continued, "subpoenaed the security footage from the entrance of Vestry Row. The quality is poor, and there is no audio, but the timestamp corresponds to your departure." He gestured to the screen. The picture of my face was replaced by a grainy black and white video. It showed Marla and me standing near the exit. It was blurry, indistinct, but then her arm moved in a swift, sharp arc, and my head snapped to the side. It was a silent movie of a crime, a ghostly dance of violence, but it was enough. It was corroboration. The motion was unmistakable. The screen went dark. The room was silent save for the sound of the rain against the glass. "Ms. Calder," Ronan said, turning to me, "your presentation." I stood up. I didn't walk to a podium. I stood right where I was, my hands resting lightly on the back of my chair. I had my 18-minute tableau presentation on a tablet in front of me, and it appeared on the main screen as I spoke. For 12 minutes, I was not a victim. I was the director of operations reporting on a catastrophic failure in our internal controls. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't inject any emotion. I simply presented the data, the numbers, the timestamps, the inconsistencies. I connected the fuel consumption of the trucks to the weight of their stolen cargo. I connected the ghost contractors' invoices to the compliance department's budget overruns. Each fact was a steel rail, and I laid them down one by one, building a track that led directly, unstoppably, to Marla. When I finished, I sat down. The silence returned, heavier this time. It was the board's outside counsel who finally spoke, his reedy voice cutting through the quiet. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of professional curiosity and shock. The evidence of financial misconduct is extensive, but I have to ask, Ms. Calder, what was the motive for the altercation at the restaurant? Why would Ms. Greer Calder risk everything by threatening and striking you? This was the moment, the pivot, the reason it all came together. She wasn't risking everything, I replied calmly. She thought she was securing it. She asked me to resign. When I refused, she assaulted me. Her motive was my job. I pressed a button on my tablet. A new slide appeared on the screen. It was an organizational chart, but with financial data overlaid. It was titled North Slip Compliance Fees. For every North Slip contract, I explained, a 3% compliance and security facilitation fee was added, approved personally by Marla. Those fees, totaling over $14 million in the last 18 months, were not paid to Northbridge. They were wired to a shell corporation. A new box appeared on the screen, linked to the fees. A Delaware C Corp named Marwin Sentry LLC. I let the name hang in the air for a moment. Marwin Sentry was incorporated 2 years ago. According to the registration documents, the sole director and signatory is a woman named Jessica Thorne. I advanced the slide. A photo of a smiling young woman appeared next to the corporate filing. Jessica has been Marla's personal executive assistant for the past 5 years. A low murmur went around the table. At the far end, I saw Marla's purse vibrate on the table. Her phone was ringing. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, she reached over and silenced it, then turned the power off completely. The tremor was a crack in the iron. The outside world was trying to warn her, but the doors to the glass box were sealed. Elliot Vance leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. He commanded the room's attention without raising his voice. "Mr. Chairman," he said, addressing Ronan but looking at the entire board. "The evidence of financial fraud is clear. The evidence of professional coercion and physical assault is undeniable. As the designated proxy voter for Acheron Capital, which represents 19% of this company's voting shares, I formally move for the immediate and indefinite suspension of Ms. Marla Greer Calder from all duties and responsibilities as Chief Compliance Officer, pending a full criminal investigation." Ronan Blake didn't hesitate. "We'll vote. All in favor of the motion to suspend." The voting was electronic, conducted on the tablets in front of each board member. The results appeared on the main screen in real time. 6 green boxes lit up almost instantly. Yes, 1 gray box appeared. Abstain, no red boxes. The vote was 6-1-0. It was over. Ronan looked toward the door. Security. 2 large men in dark suits, who had been standing discreetly in the hall, entered the room. They walked silently toward Marla. She didn't seem to see them. She was staring at me, her face a mask of disbelief and pure, undiluted hatred. "Ms. Greer Calder," Ronan said, "please escort these gentlemen from the building." Slowly, she pushed her chair back and stood up. The security guards stood a respectful distance away, their presence a quiet, unmovable fact. She didn't look at Ronan or anyone else. Her eyes were fixed on me. As she walked past my chair, she paused. "You will pay for this, Ava," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. I didn't flinch. I met her gaze and held it. My voice as cold and clear as the rain on the glass. "The invoice," I said, "has already been printed." After the security guards had escorted Marla from the room, an unnerving quiet settled over the glass box. The remaining board members packed their briefcases with a subdued efficiency, their faces a careful mixture of shock and professional detachment. They offered me curt, formal nods as they filed out, their eyes avoiding mine. They were weather vanes, already turning to face the new wind. Soon, only Ronan Blake, Elliot Vance, and I remained, the sound of the rain against the immense windows filling the void. Ronan stood and walked not to the exit, but to a locked credenza against the far wall. He produced a key, opened a drawer, and retrieved a single, heavy envelope made of thick, cream-colored vellum. It was sealed not with adhesive, but with a wax emboss of my father's personal monogram. It felt like an artifact from another century. He walked back and placed it on the table in front of me. "This was entrusted to my care by your father's estate attorney over a year ago," Ronan said, his judicial tone softening into something more personal. "I was given very specific instructions. It was to be delivered to you personally, and only in the event of one of two triggers." He paused, his gaze steady and meaningful. "The first was evidence of domestic violence. The second was a verifiable act of professional coercion against you, perpetrated by his wife." My breath hitched. My father, even from the fog of his illness, his mind had laid this one last contingency plan. Ronan slid the envelope closer. "The events of last night, corroborated by Mr. Vance, have triggered the second condition. This is for you." My hands felt numb as I took the envelope. It had a physical weight that seemed to go beyond the paper and wax. I broke the seal with my thumbnail. Inside, there was a multi-page document, bound by a simple brass brad. The language was dense, a thicket of legal terminology, but I scanned for the operative clauses. The words my mind knew how to find. It was a secret codicil, an amendment to my father's last will and testament. It established a private entity, the Calder North Protectorate Trust. Then I saw the paragraph that made the air leave my lungs in a silent rush. It stated that, in the event the trigger condition was met, a specific block of Graham Calder's personal shares in Northbridge Dynamics, a block amounting to 22% of the company's total outstanding stock, was to be immediately and irrevocably transferred from his primary estate into the newly activated trust. The sole trustee and beneficiary of this trust was named as his daughter, Ava Calder. 22%. It was a staggering number. It was a controlling interest when combined with a major allied shareholder. It was power. Not just the power to have a voice, but the power to set the agenda. But there were conditions for the activation. A legal firewall my father had built to ensure it couldn't be triggered frivolously. The codicil required two things. First, verifiable, documented proof of physical harm or a direct, recorded threat to professional livelihood. The doctor's report, the photos, the USB drive, check. And second, the event had to be attested to by an independent, non-familial, third-party witness. Seat 17. A tremor ran through my hands, so violent I had to place the document down on the table. But the shaking wasn't from the sudden acquisition of power. It wasn't from the shock of the wealth or the corporate leverage that had just fallen into my lap. It was from the cold, heartbreaking clarity of my father's foresight. He knew, when he had married Marla, some part of him, some deep, strategic, and perhaps deeply sad part of him, knew what she was capable of. He had seen the ambition in her, the ruthlessness he himself possessed, but untempered by love or loyalty. He had married a shark, and in his last lucid act, he had forged a cage for me to use in case she ever decided to bite. This document wasn't a gift. It was a weapon left behind a glass plate that read, "In case of betrayal, break glass." The slap I endured was the sound of that glass shattering. "Ava?" Ronan's voice pulled me back. I looked up, my eyes stinging. "He knew," I whispered, the words barely audible. "He knew she would do something like this." Ronan gave a slow, somber nod. Graham was a brilliant man, and a complicated one. He saw the company as his legacy, and you as its steward. He built a fortress to protect both. He gestured toward Vance. "Mr. Vance has already been on the phone with Acheron Capital's leadership. With their 19% stake, They are prepared to vote as a block with your newly acquired 22%. That is a 41% controlling interest. No one else on the board can stand against that. The pieces were not just falling into place, they were locking together with the force of a tectonic shift. Acheron fully supports the board's motion to appoint you as interim chief operating officer, Ronan stated. It gives you the authority to oversee the internal investigation and stabilize the company's operations. The board will hold a formal vote to ratify it this evening. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Less than 24 hours ago, I was a director about to be fired and blacklisted. Now, I was on the verge of becoming the most powerful person in the company my father had built. I needed air. I pushed my chair back and walked toward the glass doors that led to a narrow stone balcony. The rain was coming down harder now. Not a mist, but a heavy, cleansing downpour. I stepped outside. The cold, wet wind, a welcome shock to my system. Below me, Grayford was a sprawling circuit board, its streets and buildings lit against the bruised evening sky, currents of light and energy flowing through its veins. For the first time, I felt like I could see how all the pieces connected. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from my lawyer. It was from Elliot Vance. His email was as spare and direct as the man himself. Subject: Next steps. Tonight, there will be another dinner with the financial press. Are you ready to tell our story? Our story, not my story. It was the story of a company correcting its course, the story of integrity finally, actually, moving us. I typed a single word in reply. Yes, I hit send. Somewhere else in the rainy city, in a car or a hotel suite, I could picture Marla. Her phone would be pressed to her ear, her face a mask of cold fury. She would be calling her allies on the board, her pet lawyers, the contacts she had spent decades cultivating, and I could picture what she would find. The calls going to voicemail, the brusque assistants telling her that Mr. So-and-so was unavailable, the lines of communication going dead one by one. The doors were not just closing, they were being bolted from the inside. I looked back through the glass wall at the empty conference table, at the single, damning document still sitting in my place, and I understood. The dinner at Vestry Row, the one I had feared and planned for, wasn't the final confrontation, it was just the appetizer, the real meal, the one where the story of Northbridge Dynamics would be rewritten for good, was about to be served, and this time, I would be sitting at the head of the table. The annual Grayford Chamber of Commerce fundraiser was the city's premier stage for corporate theater. The ballroom of the Omni Hotel was a cavern of calculated opulence, bathed in a deep blue light that matched the velvet backdrops on the main stage. The air was a cloying mix of expensive perfume and catered salmon, the soundtrack a bland jazz trio that no one was listening to. This was a room of handshakes that were also measurements of strength, of smiles that hid shareholder lawsuits, a place where fortunes were burnished and reputations were quietly assassinated over cocktails. Tonight, we were about to have a very public execution. I walked in flanked by my two knights. On my right was Ronan Blake, his imposing judicial presence a silent declaration that this was official business. On my left was Elliot Vance, his quiet, observant stillness radiating a different, more lethal kind of power. We were not there to mingle. We moved through the crowd like a single, determined unit, a blade parting water. Whispers followed in our wake. I was still Ava Calder, the director of operations, but the story of Marla's sudden, dramatic leave of absence had already begun to leak, and my presence here with the interim chairman and a man who was a ghost to most was a potent accelerant to the gossip. Our table was near the front. A small, brass plaque on it read, Northbridge Dynamics. My place card was set squarely in the middle. Behind it, an empty chair was designated seat number 17. As I took my seat, I caught Elliot's eye. He gave me the barest hint of a wink, a private acknowledgement of the cosmic poetry of it all. Tonight, the power of seat 17 wasn't behind me, unseen. It was beside me, a visible and unwavering ally. We endured the salad course and the mayor's painfully unfunny speech. Then, the master of ceremonies, a local news anchor with a blindingly white smile, stepped up to the podium. "And now," he boomed, his voice echoing slightly, "we honor a company that is a true pillar of our community, a company that doesn't just move goods, but moves the very benchmark of corporate responsibility. Please welcome to the stage a representative from Grayford's own beacon of compliance and integrity, Northbridge Dynamics." A polite, lukewarm applause rippled through the room. A single spotlight swung from the podium to our table, pinning me in its white glare. This was the moment. The music in my head, the frantic, buzzing soundtrack of the last 48 hours, suddenly went silent. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. I stood up, smoothed the front of my simple black dress, and walked toward the stage. I bypassed the podium, walking instead to the center of the stage. Holding a small remote in my hand, I waited for the applause to die down. The silence that followed was expectant. They were waiting for the usual corporate platitudes, the thanks for the award, the praise for the city. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and amplified by the microphone clipped to my dress. It didn't waver. The MC described Northbridge as a beacon of compliance and integrity. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Tonight, we have a correction to make." A confused murmur rippled through the first few rows. On stage, the news anchor's smile faltered. "For too long," I continued, my eyes scanning the sea of powerful faces, "we have allowed the idea of compliance to be used as a shield, a beautiful, polished veneer to hide behind. But integrity isn't a shield to hide what's broken. It's a light you shine to fix it. Tonight, we are removing the shield." With a click of the remote, the massive screen behind me, which had been displaying the Chamber of Commerce logo, blinked to life. It showed a simple, stark flowchart. A box at the top read, "North Slip Project." Below it, arrows pointed to a dozen smaller boxes, representing millions of dollars in payments, and all of those arrows converged on a single box at the bottom. The name inside was Marwin Sentry, LLC. Another click. The next slide showed the Delaware incorporation documents for Marwin Sentry. The EIN number was circled in red. The sole director's signature, a looping, elegant script belonging to Marla's assistant, was magnified. Another click. A side-by-side comparison of 3 multi-million-dollar invoices from 3 different security firms, with the identical IP address of their creation highlighted in yellow. The murmuring in the room was growing louder now, transforming from confused whispers into a low, hungry hiss of scandal. In the back, I could see the press row stir to life. Phones were being raised, laptops were being opened. Then, the final click. The screen was filled with my own face, the brutal, technicolor bruise stark under the clinical light of the urgent care. The silence that followed was absolute, a shocked vacuum. Then, the eruption. The back of the room exploded in a frenzy of camera flashes, a barrage of silent lightning strikes capturing the corporate crime and its violent consequence in a single frame. "She's lying! It's all fabricated!" The shriek came from the side of the ballroom. A commotion erupted near a service entrance. Marla, uninvited and unannounced, her face pale and her eyes wild, burst through a line of waiters. She was surging toward the stage, her perfect composure shattered, replaced by a raw, desperate fury. "She's a vindictive child, trying to steal her father's company." 2 security guards moved to intercept her, but before they could, Elliot Vance stood up from our table. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He simply raised one hand, a gesture of calm, absolute authority that seemed to stop time. The flashes paused. The shouting stopped. Marla froze at the foot of the stage, her chest heaving. "My name is Elliot Vance," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room with an unnerving clarity. "I was a direct, first-hand witness to the assault that caused the injury you see on that screen." He let that sink in for a heart-stopping second. "I am also the authorized proxy for Acheron Capital, the second-largest institutional shareholder of Northbridge Dynamics, and I can confirm," he added, his eyes locking on Marla, "that as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, by a majority vote of the board, Ms. Greer Calder was indefinitely suspended from all duties related to the company." The MC, who had been standing by the podium looking utterly bewildered, looked as if he'd been turned to stone. The entire room, which had been a chaotic sea of noise a moment before, was now so quiet it felt like the air had been sucked out. It was the silence of 100 scandals being born at once, of 100 powerful people recalculating their alliances in a single, terrifying instant. Marla, defeated and exposed, seemed to snap. She lunged for the microphone on the podium. A security guard finally reached her. Grabbing her arm, she twisted, her face contorted with a lifetime of frustrated rage, and screamed at me, her voice raw and cracking. "You're nothing! You're just the stepdaughter!" The insult, meant to wound and diminish me, to cast me as a usurper, hung in the dead air. I looked down at her from the stage, not with anger, but with a kind of solid pity. I leaned into the microphone. "That may be," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence. "But I'm the one who is signing the paychecks tomorrow." The chaos of the ballroom was a world away. We were in a hastily commandeered space backstage, a sterile, windowless room that usually served as a green room for guest speakers. The lingering smell of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner hung in the air. A portable conference table had been set up, and on the wall opposite, a large monitor glowed, displaying the secure login portal for the Northbridge Dynamics Emergency Shareholder e-vote. The tension in this small, quiet room was 1,000 times greater than the public drama that had just unfolded. This was not theater. This was the abattoir where power was rendered. Ronan Blake, Elliot Vance, 2 corporate lawyers from an outside firm, and a senior technician sat at the table. I stood behind them, watching, through a wide, soundproofed glass window that looked out into the corridor. I could see Marla. She was seated on a hard plastic chair between 2 stoic security guards, her lawyer standing beside her, looking utterly defeated. She wasn't shouting anymore. She was just watching us, her face a blank mask, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen inside our room, the screen that would decide her fate. The first 10 minutes were a blur of legalistic precision. One of the lawyers, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice like dry ice, was on a conference call with my father's estate attorney and a representative from the SEC. They were formally validating the codicil. I could hear fragments of their conversation, a cold recitation of clauses, statutes, and authentications. It was the swift, dispassionate language of transfer. "The trigger condition has been met and attested to by an independent arbiter. We have confirmation from the trustee, initiating the transfer of share block 7 Alpha Calder into the Protectorate Trust, effective immediately." A line of text scrolled across the bottom of the monitor in our room. "Shareholder update. Calder North Protectorate Trust now holds 22% of voting shares." It was done. A lifetime of my father's work, a significant piece of his soul, had just been placed into my hands. I felt the weight of it, not as a victory, but as a profound, crushing responsibility. Elliot Vance did not waste a moment. He leaned forward and, with a few keystrokes on his laptop, formally tabled the motion for the emergency vote. The text appeared on the screen, stark and brutal in a simple sans-serif font. Motion: to ratify the Board of Directors' decision for the immediate and permanent termination of Marla Greer Calder from the position of Chief Compliance Officer and all other roles within Northbridge Dynamics, to appoint Ava Calder as Interim Chief Operating Officer with full executive authority, and to authorize a full, independent criminal investigation into the North Slip project and related financial misconduct. Below the text, 2 boxes appeared: vote yes and vote no, and next to them, a percentage tracker, currently sitting at 0%. Acheron Capital votes yes, Elliot said quietly, and with a single, definitive click of his mouse, the number on the screen leaped. Yes, 19%. Then, my own lawyer, acting as my proxy, did the same. Calder North Protectorate Trust votes yes. The number jumped again, a silent explosion. Yes, 41%. We had crossed the Rubicon. The remaining 59% of shares were held by a mix of institutional investors and smaller individual shareholders. All of them now logged into this same portal from their homes and offices. Having witnessed the public spectacle just minutes before, they had seen the evidence, they had seen the witness, they had seen the crime. The technician monitoring the system spoke, his voice hushed. The other major funds are coming in. The number began to climb. It didn't leap, it flowed, like a rising tide. Each percentage point was a voice, a decision being made in a dozen other quiet rooms across the country. Yes, 62%. We had the majority, it was official, but it didn't stop. The number kept climbing, a relentless digital repudiation of Marla and everything she had built. Yes, 71%. I looked through the glass at Marla. Her carefully constructed mask of composure was gone. Her hands were in her lap, and they were shaking. It was not a slight tremor. It was a violent, uncontrollable shudder, as if she were touching a live wire, the raw electricity of her downfall coursing through her. Her empire was being liquidated in real time, and all she could do was watch the numbers climb. Yes, 79%. The number finally settled there, blinking softly. 79% yes, 8% no, 13% abstain. A landslide. A corporate revolution executed in less than 30 minutes. Ronan Blake let out a long, slow breath. He looked over at me, his stern face holding a measure of respect. Ava, he said, his voice a low rumble. Do you have a closing statement for the record? I walked to the table and stood so that I was visible to Marla through the glass. I didn't look at the screen or the men in the room. I looked directly at her. For years, I said, my voice steady. The idea of compliance at this company has been twisted. It has been used as a weapon to intimidate, to silence, and to control. It became a shield for the powerful, not a protection for the honest. I saw a flicker in her eyes, a spark of the old hatred. That ends tonight. From this moment on, compliance at Northbridge will mean what it is supposed to mean. It will be a tool to protect the vulnerable. It will be a promise that anyone, at any level of this company, can speak the truth without fear. It will be a shield for the person who sees something wrong, not for the person who does wrong. Its first act will be to protect the person I was last night, and every night before that. I finished. There was no applause. There was only a heavy, profound silence. Elliot Vance nodded once, a sharp, clean gesture of finality. He closed his laptop. The soft click was the sound of a door being locked for the last time. Outside. I could hear the rhythm of the storm change. The wind that had been howling against the building died down, and the rain, which had been a driving, angry sheet, softened into a steady, vertical fall. The storm had broken. The door to our room opened. One of the security guards stepped inside and looked at Ronan, who gave him a nod. The guard stepped back into the corridor. We watched through the glass as he approached Marla and handed her a single, sealed envelope. Even from a distance, I could read the words printed on it. Official notice of termination. She took it, her shaking hands struggling to grasp the paper. She didn't open it. She looked up, her gaze finding mine through the glass. Her mouth moved, forming a silent word. Then her lawyer leaned in and spoke to the guard, who nodded and opened the door to our room, allowing her to stand in the doorway for one final moment. She wasn't looking at a rival anymore. She was looking at a ghost, at the ruin of her life's ambition. "You've ruined everything," she whispered, her voice a dry, rasping thing. I looked back at the woman who had haunted my life for 2 decades. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a strange, cold clarity. "I didn't ruin anything, Marla," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute finality. "I just turned off the lights in a room you never should have entered." When I stepped back into the main ballroom, it was like re-entering a different dimension. The frantic, high-stakes drama of the green room vanished, replaced by the warm, humming thrum of the party. The jazz trio was playing again, a gentle, melodic apology for the earlier disruption. The lighting, which had seemed harsh and interrogative before, now felt soft and golden, as if the entire building had collectively exhaled. Its tension released into the rainy night. People were laughing, networking, blissfully unaware that a corporate dynasty had just been decapitated backstage. They only knew there had been a scene, a delicious morsel of gossip they would dine on for weeks. They had no idea they had witnessed the birth of an entirely new era. Ronan Blake had already departed, a man who had done his duty and had no taste for the celebration, but Elliot Vance was waiting at our table, a silent sentinel. He hadn't ordered a drink. A simple glass of water sat before him. As I approached, he stood, pulling out my chair. I sat, and he resumed his own seat. He raised his glass of water, the gesture small and understated amidst the clinking champagne flutes around us. He didn't offer a toast or a word of congratulations. He didn't have to. Our entire alliance had been built on a foundation of verifiable facts and necessary actions, not on sentiment. The evidence had spoken for us, and the outcome was its closing argument. I raised my own glass of water and touched its rim to his. It was a silent, perfect communion, a clean victory. A moment later, a vibration against my hip, my phone. I pulled it from my purse, the screen glowing in the dim light. It was a system-wide email, blasted to every Northbridge Dynamics employee across the globe, from the C-suite to the night shift workers on the loading docks. The subject line was stark. Internal announcement. Leadership change. The body of the message was even more direct. Effective immediately. Marla Greer-Calder has been terminated from her position as Chief Compliance Officer. Ava Calder has been appointed by the Board of Directors as Interim Chief Operating Officer. Further details will be forthcoming. It was the coldest, most impersonal, and most beautiful paragraph I had ever read. It was the digital trumpet blast announcing the fall of a tyrant and the start of a new reign. My thumb hovered over the screen, tracing the letters of my new title. I felt the second button on the bodice of my dress, the tiny, powerful device that had started it all. Its job was done. With a gentle touch, I held the small, recessed power button for 3 seconds. I felt a single, final vibration against my fingertip, confirming it was off. The witness was now silent. Its testimony had been delivered. My gaze drifted past the oblivious crowd, to the massive plate glass windows that looked out onto the city. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the reflection of the ballroom was cast against the glittering skyline. I could see the reflection of the large, "Integrity Moves Us" banner from the stage, and superimposed over those words was my own face, in the warm, forgiving light of the party. The angry bruise on my cheek was no longer visible. The reflection showed a face that was tired, but whole, unmarked. The motto was no longer a bitter irony. It was a promise I intended to keep. I picked up my phone again. I had one more message to send, one more loose end to tie. I sent a text to Jace, the IT analyst who had been trapped in Marla's web. My first official order as COO was not a grand strategic directive, but a small act of liberation. Restore the anonymous hotline, effective immediately. No filters, no moderation, no backdoors. Let them speak. His reply came back in less than 10 seconds. Yes, ma'am. It's done. From the far end of the Grand Hotel lobby, beyond the doors of the ballroom, I could just make out the sound of a service elevator dinging. It was a quiet, final sound. It was the sound of Marla's departure. Her footsteps, which had once echoed with authority on the marble floors of Northbridge Tower, were now fading into the sound of the city's rain, absorbed by the night. No one in this room turned to watch her go. No one even knew she was gone. She hadn't been defeated. She had simply been erased. I turned my attention back to the table, to the empty place sitting beside me. Slowly, deliberately. I stood up, picked up my purse and my water glass, and moved one chair over. I settled into the seat, the leather still cool, The chair that had been my witness, my silent, strategic partner. The place from which Elliot Vance had watched the truth unfold. I looked out at the room, at the company, at the city. From this new vantage point, a small smile, the first genuine one in months, touched my lips. It felt foreign and welcome. Seat 17, I thought to myself, the words a silent, final caption to the entire affair, the place where my humiliation was supposed to have been sealed, the place where my liberation began, the place where a slap didn't end a career, but signed it into power. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to connect with all of you. So please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. And to help this story reach even more people, you can give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button. Your support means the world.